Every loyal Times reader has got a kind of list of grievances. And that's the way it should be. That's what a mature relationship. People shouldn't be, overly reliant on any news source. I said to anyone who asks, particularly young people, read multiple sources. Try and read or look at or watch someone whose ideology you disagree with. That's how you learn what's going on in the world.
So speaking of sleep and things that keep you up at night, the news.
Yeah, so I would say a fairly quiet day today.
Yeah.
At times we got the first word last night about an important new witness in the impeachment process, but we're in the middle of it's one of those process stories. There's always more to say, but at this stage there's nothing definitive. So that's running on. We're in day 3 or day 4 of the al-Baghdadi story. In the UK, we've got probably an election coming. There's, as usual, total chaos in Parliament at the moment.
Yeah.
But, and the attempt there is, they're getting fairly desperate. Brexit's sort of stuck in Britain's throat like a fishbone. It won't come. It won't go down. It won't come up, sort of thing. And this is fairly. The Brits don't like voting very often. Yeah. They were asked to vote in an election in 15, again in 17. This is now going to be December 19, it looks like. Dangerous first, for almost a century, a December election. They're worried because there's been a very bad flu epidemic this year in Australia. And the theory is by December that could be hitting the UK. And it's not just that people are going to get flu, but flu tends to paralyse the National Health Service. And the risk for the government is you've got a health service emergency as people are going to the polls. But it's Boris's attempt to try and break this logjam. I'm not going to try and do a Nathan Silver except to say the stakes are very high. It's very hard for him to get a majority. He's a great campaigner, though. He's a chancer, and he's a great campaigner. I think scenario 1 is he just gets enough of a majority to get his deal through. On we go. I don't think Labour can get a majority, so the alternative is either another paralysed Parliament or some kind of coalition of Labour with other parties, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think it's striking to me that the first Brexit vote happened so long ago that you and I were still colleagues at the New York Times. So.
No, it's true. It's true. And it's this dangerous business of mixing a representative democracy with direct democracy. It's like the kind of experiments happening in this country and the UK that they're superficially couldn't be more different, two different systems, the rest of it. A lot of the same themes are playing out, and that underlying story of anger, really deep, slightly amorphous anger and polarization, which is really bad. And the UK's not used to it, and it's really bad.
It's terrible in the UK, and I think it's playing out with the impeachment story in an interesting way in the last couple of days. The new witness that's come forward is a young man named Alexander Vindman, who is a highly decorated veteran. Did 2 tours in Iraq, educated at Harvard, worked in the White House.
An immigrant from the Soviet Union.
Yes, exactly. A refugee, in fact, from the Soviet Union. And you currently have surrogates of the Trump administration essentially going out and calling him, not a real American. Perhaps he's a Ukrainian mole. And that, I think, gives you a sense of where we're at right now, that a person who came as a child refugee, served their country, is essentially being painted in this light.
And that basic story of facts, in this case biographical facts about a real human being, real facts, it themselves turning out to be, many people believe, well, you can have an opinion about those facts, and your opinion can almost flip those positive facts, in this case, into negative facts. And I think that's what, the classic problem of news and opinion is now completely jumbled in the political discourse.
Yeah. Well, how is the business of news? You run a great newspaper. Things have been going pretty well for the New York Times.
So what I want to say is, I think one of our breakthroughs a few years ago was to realise, the tradition, particularly in this country, is of like a church-state divide of a newsroom and a business side, and it's true. You want very careful segregation of duties between, selling spots to advertisers and reporting on those same companies. That's absolutely right. Actually, we're at a moment where it's a Rubik's Cube. The journalism and content and audience and technology and product and monetization are all faces of one thing that you have to kind of twist the whole cube and to get the colors in the right place. And I think our biggest breakthrough is realizing we have to do this together. It's going to be a profound collaboration. It's going to be a multidisciplinary team, which has got journalists and editors. It's got data scientists. It's got designers and UX people. It's got product and tech people, marketing people, and so on. I think I would say that the success we've had is really because we thought about how we work together against the puzzle together. In a way which was new in the company. It was just happening, in your last period, it was just beginning to happen. It's beginning to get into real momentum. But no, I mean, for us, we've tripled the number of subscriptions. We're adding, close to 1 million subscribers per year now, which is...
And you've got a goal of 10 million by 2025.
Yeah, we're about 5 million, about 1.5 when I arrived, about 5 million now. We've got a goal of...
Good humble brag there. 1.5 when I arrived, about 5 now. Yeah.
But to repeat, this is not me. This is if I've done anything, it's about trying to pull this team together and help, an independent newsroom realize it better lead in the future of journalism. So it's been us doing all of this. But 10 million mark, we hope by 2025 or sooner. Our modelling suggests that the global opportunity, the national and global opportunity for the Times is very large and much larger than that. So, we're now in a world where our revenue goes up every quarter. We remain very strongly profitable, and we're able to use our wonderful print product and the cash it throws off as like an internal investment bank to pour into both content and engineering. We've got over the last 7 years we've added 300 journalists. Yeah. We've now got about 1,750 journalists in the place, and we've got many more engineers and data scientists and so on. But what I want to say is we have advantages. We're painfully aware that we've got advantages, and our industry continues as an industry to really suffer. And I think the existential threat to journalism and holding institutions to account, we can see that playing out at local and regional level across the United States, up to including major metros. And in Europe, we can see that in entire countries playing out. And I would say that nothing that's happened yet, I mean, I think there are maybe some things that others can learn from what we've done at the Times and some other success stories, because we're not the only ones. But it's still a really dangerous point. One of the ironies is democracies it depends on a number of pillars. A legal system which is independent and strong, but also a free press which is strong. And the great danger for the press is it's like a pincer attack. On the one hand, you've now got this whole debate about whether you can really believe what media says, or whether you should prefer your own opinions and your own facts. That's one prong of the attack. But the other one is the economics of digital and the fact that so few publishers are kind of cracking the code or kind of getting that Rubik's Cube in the right shape.
Well, I increasingly think about information ecosystem collapse rather than just the dying of the news industry, because the reality is that, just as the Industrial Revolution unleashed extraordinary economic growth, largely through the use of highly polluting carbon fuels, it also left us with what may ultimately be an uninhabitable planet. And my big fear is that the information age has essentially created a similar effect, but in our information ecosystem, where disinformation, coupled with the destruction of previous business models, actually poses a civilizational risk, right? I mean, just as climate change is a huge risk, I think that the lack of trust, it poses a huge threat to our way of life.
So I agree with that. I mean, I want to say that on optimistic days, I think we are genuinely cracking the code on some of this. We're trying to figure out ways in which we can share some of the stuff that we've done with others. I think there are some signs of the relationship with the major platforms, to include Google, but Facebook and Apple and others, getting into a new phase. That could help. As you know, regulators around the world are fired up. In a way, it's good they're paying attention. It's right they're paying attention. I worry constantly, though, that regulation is a very blunt instrument. And if we can figure out a way of collaborating in the industry, that's a much better path than waiting for regulation, which tends to kind of arrive late, and also quite often kind of, there's kind of collateral damage that, some of the innocent...
Well, and it often protects incumbents, right? I mean, I think that one of the big effects of GDPR, for example, is it sort of solidifies the position of Facebook and Google rather than fundamentally undermining it, and makes it impossible for anyone to compete with them. So,
I talked to a senior person in the Commission about GDPR 18 months ago, and I was sailing off into exactly this point about publishers. It turns out many of the world's publishers rely more on third-party data environments than the major platforms do. And she said, can I stop you? Can you tell me what third-party data is? And in a way, I mean, you understand. I mean, these are people who are doing something else for a living most of the time. But and the risk, and we've seen that in some of the evidence that's been given in the US Congress and in the UK Parliament and all the rest of it, that the gulf of understanding between politicians and regulators and both industries and above all the kind of Silicon Valley giants is epic.
Well, but I think also even industry solutions can be problematic. I mean, I was a bit dismayed. I mean, the New York Times decided sort of in the last instance to join up with Facebook and take a big check and be part of their new news tab. But what I saw on stage with Mark and Robert Thompson was essentially the same thing, locking an advantage for the best-funded, wealthiest news organizations in the world, right? They're the ones that are getting checks. What about the local news organizations? What about digital news organizations that are really struggling, that don't have a subscription model?
So, as I've said, I believe that we need to find solutions for the whole industry. I have to say, I mean, at the same time, I arrived at a news organisation which itself was fighting for its life, and we're kind of trying to adopt the principle in the airline is first put your own oxygen mask on before you try and help anyone else, sort of thing. And Facebook News, the principle of a platform paying, what I've described to colleagues inside the Times as a step change amount of money from a platform for a very specific thing. This news tab is a very particular use within. This is not about Instagram or the wider Facebook environment. It's about one particular thing. I think is helpful, and it's not surprising a platform would begin with big, well-known brands. If it's successful, I would very much hope that principle begins to be applied more broadly by Facebook, and also potentially the other major platforms think of. I mean, if you're going to benefit from great quality journalism and make a big song and dance about curating it and presenting it, the idea you might help pay some of the economics that makes it possible to do it is not a crazy idea. And I think the world where a platform can say, well, look, we're going to give you a vast audience. How can you fail to make a great business if you've got millions of unique users? Those days are over. We understand now the economics of a single anonymous user, and you can have 100 million of them and still not have a good business.
I mean, I think another step change is Google's prioritization of original reporting. Very much so, yeah. My personal experience with this is when one of the last big stories that I covered as a foreign correspondent for the Times was the funeral of Nelson Mandela, and this famously became part of the innovation report, where my current employer, which was then the Huffington Post, actually got more traffic aggregating the New York Times coverage of Nelson Mandela's funeral than the Times did. Now, that's all changed. We do things differently at HuffPost
Well,
now.
it's kind of changed. It's kind of changed. I mean, still, I would say it still happens several times a month that somebody else, to give you an example, I mean, a Times will do a story, and let's take CNN, another great big news brand, and in many ways a very good quality journalist engine itself. But CNN will perfectly respectfully quote our story, and the New York Times will be in the first sentence. So that sometimes appears higher up in search, even though it's only 5 minutes after our original story, rather than the original story. So that's something that but we're working on. I think progress is being made there, I'd say.
I think that Google shifting and putting a thumb on the scale for the person that broke the story is, I think, a really good step in the right direction.
And I want to say that's another example of a platform listening. And actually responding. And that I would say, I'm not saying that's an entirely new thing, but I think that that sense of the relationship improving is again a sign for optimism.
And I think it's also something that will lead to greater health in the industry, right? If you can't build a business out of aggregating other people's content, then you won't, right? Then it leaves more time and attention for the quality players who are actually doing the work. We have a lot of CMOs in the room, so I want to talk about advertising. How important is advertising to the overall kind of pie chart of revenue for the Times? And even as you're focusing on subscription revenue, it seems to me that that's a really big part of it.
It is. I mean, we're a subscription-first business. In the end, the core of our future is going to be deep relationships with those people who love us. We still want a very big audience, though, we have, as I said, about 5 million subscribers, 145 million unique users in September, about 100 in the US and the rest abroad. And we want great partnerships with brands. I mean, our thesis is moving away from kind of open market programmatic. I think we'll probably start exiting open market programmatic, for example, in our apps really quite soon. Much more towards deep integrations. We did a fabulous integration with Google Cloud. Our photo archive was digitized for the first time, kind of essentially black and white photographs, millions of them in a kind of damp basement, sucked up into Google Cloud, and a multi-million dollar partnership over a long period of time to really bring that archive to the world's attention. That would be a good example. That and various forms of branded content feels like much more of the way forward for us than traditional space selling. I'm not saying we're not going to do any of the latter, but that too is changing. Unfortunately, I think the higher value podcasting, the Daily in particular, is a fabulous advertising platform at the moment. So trying to find with podcasting and TV new forms, and again, encouraging advertisers to think about print, apps, mobile web, podcasting, and potentially video and TV as a kind of way of running a campaign. That's the way we're thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think about this a lot because, the subscriber model, I think, is great, and it's important that exists. But I also think that a diverse media landscape is important.
Completely.
And having free-to-consumer journalism of significant quality is a really important thing to a democracy.
Yeah, and I want to say,
so I think a lot about advertising and how, that actually can and should be able to pay the bills for a certain type of news organization.
We think having that broad number of unique users is good for our subscription business.
Sure.
And it means we've got 140 million people, most of whom are reading as much of the New York Times as they want to every month without encountering an actual requirement to pay. So, and when there's a natural disaster like Sandy, or when there's an election, we take the entire pay gate down so people can consume as much as they want. So we're trying to find this way of still keeping the Times out there, influential, and available for the whole world with the reality, which is we can't keep that amazing newsroom going unless we can figure out a way of paying for it. And our best bet at the moment is this subscription model.
The Times is taking a lot of, despite things being really great from a business perspective, or doing well from a business perspective, you're also taking a lot of flack, understandably on the right, because they've always hated the Times, but increasingly on the left. How do you hold that space in the center?
Well, this business, the lonely spot of trying to stand for objective reporting, which is not tribal, It's not trying to make an ideological point, but just trying to get, I mean, we have opinion pages, and editorials in particular, which historically have tended to be liberal in focus, predominantly liberal. We've been hiring conservative writers as well. Often people have found that difficult to take. But we're unashamed about trying to stand for something which is outside the ideological hurly-burly and is just trying to help people to pursue the truth and to help people understand the world. That's what we're trying to do. And, you know, people often say, because we've seen some, you know, people cancelling their subscriptions. There's been a movement on the left, which slightly awkwardly, the President of the United States joined last week. Tragically, we've lost a very loyal subscriber at the moment. We'll win him back.
I have a feeling you have not lost him as a loyal subscriber.
No, I hope he won't cheat and look at it without paying. But people often say, do you want trusting? You know, do you want trust from your readers? You know what? We want critical, disputatious readers. We want people who've got an opinion. Every loyal Times reader has got a kind of list of grievances. And that's the way it should be. That's what a mature relationship. People shouldn't be, you know, overly reliant on any news source. I said to anyone who asks, particularly young people, read multiple sources. Try and read or look at or watch someone whose ideology you disagree with. That's how you learn what's going on in the world.
That's right. Mark, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Lydia. Thank you.